This is Cultish Tendencies 13, and the focus of this particular discourse is the Abu Khadijite cult, Salafi Publications Cults, forthcoming conference on the 19th of July, which in actuality is tomorrow until the 21st. And the reason for this particular episode is to address many unanswered questions that still need to be addressed by the cult leaders themselves. And before getting into the questions, it's important to look at the rationale behind many of these conferences of the cult. And as I've made inferences before, I'll remind the listener that many of these cult conferences are in actuality calling to the cult leaders, calling to their movement, not calling to the scholars as they purport, as they claim. You only have to look back over the last 20 years to see that many names of scholars who are no longer with them were cited on their flyers, on their advertisements. And on the day or days of the events, none of those scholars actually turned up whatsoever. This may have been the plan from the outset, or maybe the scholars could not make it. Allah knows best in this regard. And on this occasion, you can see there's an intimation that they are feeling the effect or pressure. In some of the brief research I did into religious cults, one of the things that they seek is exclusivity in faith. And I'll quote this excerpt because this excerpt would show that this is what the cult are doing with these conferences. Most religious cults demand that their members give them exclusivity. Members are not permitted to attend their other religious events or other groups' conferences. I've added that last part there. And are told they can only find true salvation through the teachings of the cult. So I'll repeat that. Most religious cults demand that their members give them exclusivity. Members are not permitted to attend other religious events of other groups and are told they can only find true salvation through the teachings of the cult. Referring to the conference now, on the 19th of July at 2030, Dr. Abdulillah Lahmami will be teaching or delivering a lecture from the hadith, based on the hadith, my ummah will split into 73 sects. And while these questions may not be entirely related to the topic, attendees, cult members particularly, if you are sincerely seeking the truth, should ask Dr. Abdulillah about the questions that have emanated from evidence from Reading regarding complicity in fraudulently obtaining funds from the local government for the brothers and colleagues that he was working with and supporting at the time. And those questions should be quite robust. Why? Because there's evidence, including a telephone recording of him admitting that he'd given permission for them to use the masjid charity number to elicit these funds, to obtain these funds. And there's CCTV footage of Naveed and Abu Sufyan discussing the theft that took place at that time. Another question that can be posed to Dr. Abdulillah in this conference, which remains unanswered and unaddressed for a long time now, over a decade, and that is his slander of Sheikhs Ibn Baz and Uthaymeen, that they were not Salafi and merely Hanbali. And the third question relates to the topic that he will be delivering. Does the cult consider itself the saved sect or part of the saved sect? And if so, are the traits they possess of disparaging scholars, theft and fraud, characteristics to be found amongst such adherents to this particular sect or claiming to be part of the saved sect? So their characteristics, the evidence that is there about their fraud, about their lies, about their deceit, about their disparagement of scholars and others, are these characteristics of the saved sect. And perhaps one of the attendees, if they are firm and confident enough, can refer Abdulillah to the verses, the English rendition, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 41 to 42, in which Allah addressed the Jews, saying, "And do not sell my verses for a small price. Be mindful of me. Do not mix truth with falsehood, or hide the truth when you know it." Moving to Saturday, the 20th of July at 2 o'clock, the next lecture where questions can be posed is one entitled "Beware of Eloquent Speech of the Callers to Misguidance" by Abu Idris Muhammad. And this is a good title, actually, but it should be directed to cult members. Also, perhaps in the questioning, Abu Idris should be reminded of the verse that addressed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 204 to 206, where Allah says, the English rendition being, "And of mankind there is he whose speech may please you in this worldly life, and he calls Allah to witness what is in his heart, yet he is the most quarrelsome of opponents." Moving on to verse 206. "And when it is said to him, 'Fear Allah,' he is led by arrogance to commit more crime." These verses may be a reminder to Abu Idris by anyone sitting in the audience if they care to remind him, unless he brings these verses during the course of his lecture. And then we move to later on in that day, 1600 hours, Abu Iyad Amjad Rafiq is debating with reason and opinion, the foundation of misguidance and splitting of the ummah. And before going into any questions for Amjad Rafiq, I think it's interesting that we look at a small excerpt of a discussion and lecture from Sheikh Saleh Al Fawzan, in which he refers to the hadith that would have been addressed earlier on, the previous day by Abdulillah Al-Ahmami, the Ummah will divide into 73 sects. And I'm going to read from his explanation of Sharh Sunnah, Barbahari's Sharh Sunnah, which Abu Khadija has got on his website, abukhadija.com, dated the 31st of May 2016. And I'll read from the section where reference is made to Surah Hud, verses 118 to 119, the English rendition being, "But they will not cease to differ, except those whom your Lord has shown mercy." And Sheikh Al-Fawzan said in relation to these verses, quote, "So his saying, 'except whom your Lord has shown mercy,' is a proof that those who are shown mercy by Allah do not differ, and that differing is a punishment and not a mercy. Mercy is for those who do not differ, and if they do differ, they return to the Quran and Sunnah for resolution. They take what is authentic and they leave alone what is mistaken. This is the path of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah." Now, I want the listener to listen very attentively to this other part of Sheikh Salih Al Fawzan's speech, again on abukhadija.com, 31st of May 2016. Quote, "As for leaving each person to his own opinion in matters of religion, then this is not the way ordained for the Muslims. Rather, that is the way of the people of whims and desires. They seek after opinions which agree with their desires, even if it means abandonment of the statements of a great scholar whose saying they would normally take, meaning they will not accept the sayings of the great scholars unless they agree with their desires. So whoever opposes what they seek, they reject it. And this proves that they are followers of their desire. And what opposes it, they cast aside." Close quote. So the question would be for Amjad Rafiq, our milk sheikh, how is it that you've dropped particular scholars that you yourself proclaimed to be alama to merely students or just brother? So there's clear evidence and writings from your cult that Yahya al-Hajuri was once alama when he was praising you. Sheikh Ali Hassan was once alama when he was favoring you. And the most recent And I think devastating for yourselves was your over 20-year relationship and favouring by Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi, who was also a lama, but is now just a mere student in your eyes. So, was this according to whims and desires because they went against what you were aiming to achieve and also saw the reality, albeit in Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi's case, after much advice from other Salafis from the West and elsewhere, over 20 years, realizing the reality of the cult in itself? So now there are no more alamas except the one or two or three possibly that are still favoring you and you favoring them. We'll move to the next talk at 18:15, 6:15 that day. And it's Abu Khadija who will be lecturing. But I think that instead of focusing on the title of his lecture, simple questions can be asked of him, which remain unanswered yet again. The first one being, when did you embrace Salafiyah? Because you claimed, and it's on YouTube, you embraced Salafiyah in 1988. But there are witness accounts that say contrary to that. So, for example, there's witness evidence that you were a non-practicing Muslim in 1991 while attending Bradford University. And your brother, a year or so later, appealed to Abu Muntazir, the head of Jimas, to give dawah to you to bring you away from the jihadi leanings and tendencies that you had at the time. And there are other accounts of individuals who began practicing and didn't remember you being around until the mid 1990s. Like myself, who converted in 1990 and was involved in the dawah, you were not known at all. No one was aware of you on a national level until the mid 1990s. And that national level is not an excuse for you now to hide and say, I was actually active locally and individuals knew you. No, those who were locally said, again, 1991, you were a non-practicing Muslim. 92 onwards, your brother appealed for help to give you dawah due to your jihadi tendencies. And the final question that would be asked to you as the head of the Abu Khadijites, because this is when the splitting accelerated, when your presence became even more prominent. Why have so many scholars and students of knowledge abandoned your cult over the last 20 or so years? We'll move to 2130 that evening, a lecture by Abu Hakim Bilal Davis. And that title is The Methodology of the Prophets versus the People of Philosophy and Kalam. And that should be an interesting talk, actually, insightful and providing many examples of how the prophets refuted their people and opponents when calling to Tawheed. But the questions that should be addressed to Abu Hakim Bilal Davis, and these are sincere questions to him. The first one being, having been on the Deen and Salafiyah from the early 90s, why have you remained silent regarding Abu Khadija's false claims about when he embraced Salafiyah? The next question for Abu Hakim should be, being more knowledgeable than Abu Khadija and Amjad Rafiq, and also having had closer ties with the scholars and students of knowledge, why did you support Abu Khadija in his quest to try and hijack the Salafi Dawah, and also be at the helm of the Salafi Dawah with your cult, not in the UK, but with the cult that you've ascribed yourself to? And the final question is to seek clarification, because many have been made aware of the tensions between Abu Hakim's masjid and the Wright Street masjid of Abu Khadija. The question, there's two parts to this. Have they been resolved, those issues? And what was the issue? What were the issues in the first place? And drawing to a conclusion, we will look at the Sunday final words of advice session at 18:15. And here I will address those cult members who will be attending and any who may be going that don't belong to the cult but feel they need to get clarification on many of these unanswered questions. What I've highlighted here are some of the unanswered questions, but questions that remain unanswered. And these attendees should look at one thing, especially the cult members, if they are more convinced that they are with the right group, the Taiful Mansura, that we are the Ghuraba, and everyone else against us is Ahl al Bida or Ahl al Ahwa. You should look at this. And I'll give you a reminder that you of self-reflection on the term denialism. Okay? Denialism is an expansion and intensification of denial. At its root, denial and denialism are simply a subset of the many ways humans have developed to use language to deceive others and themselves. Denial can be as simple as refusing to accept that someone else is speaking truthfully. And I'll end on this for cult attendees. Cults often twist and or distort spirituality to suit the purpose of the leader or leaders, and those who question them find themselves punished or humiliated. You only have to look at the track record of the cult to see and understand that latter part that I've quoted is a reality. If you are not with them 100%, you are marginalized. You are then refuted. And if you come from a small community setting, this can be very devastating for you. So you need to look at this. This conference they are holding is to bolster their support due to the criticisms, attacks, and exposés that have been given against them. They need to answer these questions. There are some clear lies that have been told by them, and they cannot do as they've done previously, and that is scrambling to remove evidence on their websites because there's too much out there now. So in conclusion, take this opportunity to really review what is taking place in that conference and question sincerely and await an answer if they give you an answer. And if they don't give you an answer, then remember this final quote, that if they don't give you an answer and they feel challenged by you, they will try to humiliate you. This is their default. This is what they've tried to do with scholars. They have no respect for anyone of learning, let alone the layperson. So don't be surprised if you're attacked, if you're disparaged, if they start insulting you because you question or you challenge them.